and polished shoes marking her as an intruder. In this world of high finance, just as the auctioneer raised his gavel for the final strike that would seal her fate, the heavy oak doors burst open with such force they slammed against the marble walls, and through them strode Patricia Kingston, president of Cornerstone First National Bank, her presence commanding immediate silence as she announced, "This auction is hereby suspended, pending investigation of fraudulent practices." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria had arrived at the Pemberton Bank auction house 3 hours early, hoping to mentally prepare herself for what felt like a public execution. She'd driven the 60 miles from Verde Valley in her battered 1995 Toyota pickup, the same truck her late husband Miguel had bought when they first moved to the ranch 15 years ago. The vehicle now sputtered and hesitated at every red light, mirroring her own mounting anxiety about the day ahead. The auction house occupied the ground floor of what locals called Bankers Row, a stretch of century-old buildings in downtown Phoenix that had once housed the city's most prestigious financial institutions. Pemberton Bank had been converted to an event space after its collapse during the 2008 crisis, and now served as the venue for high-stakes property auctions. The irony wasn't lost on Maria, a failed bank hosting auctions for failing farmers. She'd chosen to arrive early to avoid the inevitable stares and whispers that would greet her presence among the investors and speculators. Maria knew she didn't belong here, not with her sun-damaged skin and calloused hands that bore the evidence of 14-hour workdays. Her clothes, though clean and pressed, were clearly from discount stores, patched in places where ranch work had taken its toll. She'd even attempted to tame her unruly dark hair into a bun, though strands already escaped, framing a face that appeared older than her 36 years. The auction house's interior spoke of old money and established power. Soaring ceilings, adorned with elaborate crown molding, rose 20 feet above marble floors worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Massive chandeliers, each worth more than her annual crop yield, cast warm light over rows of mahogany chairs, already filling with the day's bidders. Oil paintings of stern-faced men in military uniforms and business suits lined the walls, their judgmental gazes following Maria as she found a seat in the back row, hoping to blend into the shadows. As the room filled, Maria recognized several faces from television and newspaper coverage of Phoenix's development boom. Richard Thornton, CEO of Desert Horizon Developments, entered with his entourage of suited lieutenants. He'd been systematically acquiring farmland throughout Maricopa County, converting agricultural properties into luxury housing developments. His company's logo, a stylized sun rising over mountains, had become synonymous with the death of family farming in the region. Margaret Whitmore arrived next, representing Silverton Capital Group, an investment firm that had pioneered the practice of farmland banking, buying agricultural properties during downturns and holding them until market conditions favored maximum profit. She moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her black suit impeccably tailored. Maria's stomach churned as these titans of industry took their places. In the front rows, their presence alone intimidating smaller bidders into silence. She knew Verde Valley Ranch would attract significant attention. At 247 acres, it represented one of the last substantial agricultural properties within Phoenix's expanding urban boundary. The land's proximity to the proposed SkyTech Innovation Corridor, a massive development project promising to transform Phoenix into a technology hub, had made it a prime target for developers. 3 years ago, when Miguel's brain aneurysm had struck without warning, Maria had believed she could continue operating the ranch alone. They'd specialized in organic produce, supplying local restaurants and farmers markets with heritage vegetables and artisanal herbs. The land had been productive, their business plan solid, their future seemingly secure, but grief and inexperience had taken their toll. Without Miguel's mechanical expertise, equipment failures had become catastrophic expenses. A late frost destroyed their spring crops, followed by an unusually dry summer that devastated their irrigation-dependent fields. When their primary water rights came up for renewal, the cost had unexpectedly tripled. Later investigation would reveal this was part of a broader pattern targeting vulnerable farms in the area. The final blow came when Agricultural Finance Corporation, the lender who had inherited their mortgage after several bank mergers, suddenly called in their loan. The terms, which had been stable for a decade, were altered, citing changed risk. Assessment parameters. Monthly payments doubled overnight, late fees accumulated rapidly. Despite Maria's attempts to negotiate, offering to convert partial acreage to organic certification programs that carried federal support, AFC refused all compromise. The foreclosure notice arrived on what would have been Miguel's 40th birthday. Maria had spent that night on the front porch of their farmhouse, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, wondering how she would tell their two children, 8-year-old Isabella and 12-year-old Carlos, that they were losing everything their father had worked to build. In the following months, Maria had exhausted every option. She applied for emergency agricultural loans, only to discover that farms facing foreclosure were considered high risk and ineligible. She reached out to local agricultural organizations, but budget cuts had eliminated most support programs. Even the Farmers' Cooperative, which had supported them during Miguel's final illness, had dissolved under financial pressure from larger corporate farming operations moving into the region. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her attempts to sell privately had been sabotaged by what she later suspected was deliberate market manipulation. Interested buyers would suddenly withdraw offers without explanation. Appraisals came in far below reasonable value. The few legitimate offers that materialized were contingent on due diligence periods that stretched endlessly, always terminating just before closing with vague references to title concerns or environmental issues. Maria's parents, immigrants, who had saved for decades to open a small grocery store, offered their life savings, $30,000, without hesitation. Her brother Juan, an accountant in Tucson, liquidated his retirement account, providing another $25,000. Friends from church organized fundraisers, raising $12,000 through bake sales and community dinners. Maria herself sold everything of value: Miguel's cherished 1968 Mustang, his extensive tool collection, even her grandmother's silver jewelry that had been in the family for generations. The total came to $67,000, enough for the minimum bid, but nowhere near the property's actual value. Maria knew she couldn't compete with corporate buyers who could write checks for hundreds of thousands without blinking. Her $15,000 opening bid represented a calculated gamble. Perhaps the other bidders would let her have the first offer out of pity, or maybe her presence would make them feel guilty about their advantaged position. The auctioneer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the cadence of a seasoned performer, called for order as the clock approached 10 o'clock. Robert Wellington, managing director of AFC, took a seat in the second row. His appearance marked the official beginning of proceedings, the foreclosing lender present to witness the property's sale and claim proceeds toward the outstanding debt. Wellington's presence seemed to energize the other bidders. They adjusted. In their seats, straightened their bidding paddles, exchanged knowing glances. For them, this wasn't personal. Verde Valley Ranch represented 247 acres of developable land with excellent highway access and existing water rights. a commodity to be acquired at the best possible price. The auctioneer began his opening remarks, describing the property's features with the enthusiasm of a carnival barker. Ladies and gentlemen, today we present Verde Valley Ranch, a premier agricultural property offering 247 acres of fertile land, multiple irrigation wells, established water rights, and existing infrastructure, including a 3,500 square foot residence, equipment barn, and various outbuildings. The property benefits from excellent soil conditions and has been meticulously maintained under family ownership for over a decade. Each word felt like a dagger to Maria's heart. Meticulously maintained didn't capture the countless hours she and Miguel had spent nurturing the soil, testing organic amendments, rotating crops to maintain nutrients. Family ownership reduced their 14 years of dreams, struggles, and triumphs to a mere stat point in the property description. The bidding opened at $100,000, exactly the amount needed to satisfy AFC's claims and associated fees. Maria expected immediate escalation from the corporate bidders, but silence stretched uncomfortably. The auctioneer tried again, elaborating on the property's development potential and water rights value. Finally, Maria raised her paddle. Her voice, though steady, carried the tremor of suppressed emotion. $115,000. The auctioneer acknowledged her bid with professional courtesy, though his eyes held a mixture of pity and discomfort. Before he could continue his cadence, laughter erupted from the front rows. Richard Thornton turned in his seat, his smirk visible even from the back of the room. "Did she seriously think that would work?" Someone whispered loudly enough for multiple rows to hear. "Adorable," another voice commented with dripping condescension. The auctioneer cleared his throat, attempting to restore decorum, but the damage was done. Maria felt her face flush with humiliation. The snickers continued as others joined in the mockery. "Perhaps she could offer to throw in some fresh vegetables," Thornton remarked to general laughter. Margaret Whitmore, maintaining a facade of professionalism, raised her paddle. $200,000. The bid jump was clearly intended to establish dominance and discourage any serious challenge from Maria's direction. It worked. Maria's paddle lowered slowly as reality crashed over her in waves. She'd known this would likely be the outcome, but experiencing the public humiliation of her inadequacy struck differently than anticipating it. $200,000 going once, the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying the certainty of an impending conclusion. Maria's mind raced through fragments of memories. Miguel teaching Carlos how to operate the tractor. Isabella collecting eggs from their small chicken coop, her face beaming with pride. Sunday afternoon conversations about expanding their organic garden operation, importing herbs from Mexico, starting a small farmer's market. 200,000 going twice. The auctioneer raised his gavel, the polished wood gleaming under the chandelier light. Maria's eyes fixed on that simple wooden hammer that held the power to shatter her family's future. The crowd fell silent, in anticipation of the formality's completion. Through her blurred vision, Maria noticed movement near the entrance doors. Several people turned, distracted by something just beyond her field of view. The auctioneer, focused on his duty, continued, raising the gavel. Then the doors exploded open. They crashed against the marble walls with enough force to create echoes that reverberated through the high-ceilinged space. Every head in the room turned toward the sudden intrusion. Maria, like the others, found herself staring at the figure. Silhouetted in the doorway, Patricia Kingston, president of Cornerstone First National Bank, stood framed by morning sunlight streaming through the entrance. Her silver suit and steel-grey hair caught the light, creating an almost ethereal effect. Despite being in her early 60s, Kingston moved with the purpose and energy of someone half her age as she strode into the room. "This auction is hereby suspended pending investigation of fraudulent practices related to this foreclosure," she announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence with crisp authority. The weight of her words landed like physical blows throughout the room. Wellington shot to his feet, his previously confident posture dissolving into defensive rigidity. Thornton's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of calculation as he tried to assess this unexpected development. Kingston's gaze swept the room before settling on Wellington. "Mr. Wellington, I'll need you to surrender all documentation related to Verde Valley Ranch immediately. My legal team will be arriving momentarily to begin preliminary investigations." Maria's mind struggled to process the scene unfolding before her. Patricia Kingston was legendary in Arizona banking circles, known as Iron Pat for her unwavering principles and fierce independent streak. She had built Cornerstone First National from a single branch to a respected regional institution. Her reputation for ethical banking and community focus made her a pariah among the larger financial institutions that dominated Phoenix's banking sector. What was she doing here? How did she know about the auction? Most importantly, why was she intervening in a completed foreclosure process? The auctioneer, visibly flustered, attempted to regain control. "Madam, with all due respect, this is a legally sanctioned foreclosure auction. Agricultural Finance Corporation has properly filed all necessary documents. I must continue proceedings." Kingston's steady gaze fixed on the auctioneer with the intensity of a laser. "Mr. Harrison, I suggest you consult your legal counsel before continuing. The documentation AFC filed contains multiple discrepancies that may constitute fraud. If you proceed with this auction in the face of potential legal violations, you expose yourself and your firm to significant liability." The threat hung in the air, powerful in its implications rather than its volume. Harrison's face paled as he weighed the risks of challenging the most respected banking executive in Arizona against completing a routine foreclosure auction. Wellington attempted to regain initiative. "This is preposterous. AFC's foreclosure procedures have been reviewed by our legal department. Ms. Kingston's accusations are baseless and appear designed to interfere with legitimate business operations." "Then you'll have no objection to full disclosure of your loan modification records for Verde Valley Ranch," Kingston countered smoothly, "including the internal memos discussing strategic deployment of variable rate triggers in agricultural lending portfolios." Wellington's face transformed from indignant to ashen in seconds. The specific reference to internal memos suggested Kingston possessed detailed knowledge of AFC's practices, knowledge that could only come from insider information or thorough investigation. The other bidders stirred uneasily. Thornton and Whitmore exchanged glances, silently communicating their recognition that this development could have implications beyond a single property auction. If questionable foreclosure practices were exposed, it could trigger reviews of other recent agricultural acquisitions. Maria remained frozen in her seat, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of her circumstances. Minutes ago, she had been facing the complete loss of her family's legacy and future. Now the most powerful banker in Arizona was apparently challenging the very foreclosure that had driven her to this humiliating moment. Kingston's team arrived as promised, 3 attorneys in expensive suits carrying boxes of documentation. They moved with practiced efficiency, setting up a makeshift station at a side table and arranging papers with systematic precision. "For the record," one of the attorneys announced, "Cornerstone First National Bank has filed emergency injunctions with Maricopa County Superior Court to halt this and 17 other AFC foreclosure proceedings pending investigation into predatory lending practices targeting agricultural properties." The number 17 resonated through the room. 17 properties meant 17 families facing similar circumstances. The scope suggested systematic rather than isolated issues, exactly the kind of pattern that could trigger regulatory intervention, and public scandal. Wellington's phone began buzzing insistently. He stepped away from the front row, his hushed conversation punctuated by increasingly agitated gestures. Other corporate representatives also received calls, their expressions growing more concerned as information filtered through their networks. Maria watched the organized chaos with growing comprehension. This wasn't random. Kingston's intervention represented the culmination of extensive preparation and investigation. Every detail, from the timing of her entrance to the specific legal threats, had been carefully orchestrated for maximum impact. "Ms. Santos," Kingston addressed her directly for the first time, her tone softening slightly though maintaining its authoritative core. "I apologize for the theatrical nature of this intervention. Your case was brought to my attention 2 weeks ago, and our investigation uncovered patterns that demanded immediate action." 2 weeks ago, Maria tried to recall what might have triggered Cornerstone's interest in her situation. Had it been her interview with the local news station about the challenges facing small farms? Her emotional testimony before the County Agricultural Board? Perhaps one of the many letters she'd written to anyone who might offer assistance had finally reached sympathetic eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Thornton," Kingston continued, addressing the major bidders, "I trust you'll inform your respective organizations that all properties acquired through AFC foreclosure in the past 18 months may be subject to review. Any development projects based on potentially fraudulent acquisitions could face significant legal challenges." The threat was clear. Companies that had already begun development on foreclosed farmland might find their investments jeopardized by the investigation's findings. The financial implications were enormous, potentially running into hundreds of millions in halted projects, legal fees, and remediation costs. Thornton stood abruptly, his corporate polish cracking to reveal genuine anger. "This is outrageous. Desert Horizon has invested significant resources based on the legitimate foreclosure of agricultural properties. These properties were acquired through proper legal channels after the owners failed to meet their financial obligations. Proper legal channels that included loan terms suddenly modified to guarantee failure," Kingston responded sharply. "Variable rate triggers activated during documented peak financial stress periods. Water rights assessments that mysteriously tripled for properties with development potential." Her questions struck with surgical precision at the core of Thornton's business model. Desert Horizon's strategy relied on acquiring distressed agricultural properties at significantly reduced costs. Any investigation that exposed manipulation of the distress itself could unravel their entire recent expansion. The room's atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What began as a routine foreclosure auction had transformed into a battlefield of corporate interests and ethical banking practices. Maria found herself at the center of forces far larger than her personal struggle to save Verde Valley Ranch. Wellington returned to his seat, his earlier confidence replaced by barely controlled anxiety. His phone call had evidently provided no reassurance or solution to the crisis unfolding around him. "I must formally protest this disruption," he declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "AFC will vigorously defend its lending practices and challenge any attempts to retroactively invalidate legitimately executed foreclosures." Kingston's response carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Your vigorous defense may begin with explaining to the Banking Commission why AFC's agricultural loan defaults increased by 340% in the quarter, immediately following implementation of your revised risk assessment protocols. Or perhaps you'd prefer to discuss the correlation between those defaults and subsequent sales to 3 specific development companies owned by parent corporations that share board members with AFC." The precision of her knowledge stunned the assembled crowd. Kingston wasn't making general accusations. She possessed specific data that could form the foundation of fraud charges. Her investigation had clearly uncovered connections between lending practices and subsequent property acquisitions that suggested coordinated manipulation rather than market forces. Maria's mind reeled as the implications sank in. Her struggles, which she had always attributed to bad luck and unfortunate timing, might actually have been the result of calculated corporate strategy. The mysterious increase in water rights, fees, the sudden loan modification, even the failed private sale attempts, all could potentially be traced to a larger scheme designed to force farmland onto the market. "Ms. Santos," Kingston turned to her again, "I understand this is overwhelming. My intervention today was necessary to prevent an irreversible injustice, but I want to assure you that your situation is not yet resolved. The foreclosure has been halted, not reversed. However, my bank would be prepared to offer bridge financing to allow proper review of your case and potentially restructure your obligations under reasonable terms." The offer represented a lifeline beyond Maria's wildest hopes. Bridge financing could provide breathing room to stabilize Verde Valley Ranch operations while legal challenges proceeded. More importantly, it suggested the possibility of exposing and correcting whatever manipulations had led to her foreclosure nightmare. The auction house buzzed with activity as various interests processed the morning's dramatic reversal. Court officers arrived to serve official documents. Reporters, somehow alerted to the developing story, began gathering outside the grand windows. Television news vans appeared, their satellite dishes rising like mechanical flowers seeking signal. Wellington attempted one final assertion of control. "Ladies and gentlemen, while this situation is being reviewed, AFC will vigorously protect its interests and those of its shareholders. We have acted within our legal rights at every stage of this process." "Then you welcome full transparency," Kingston stated rather than asked. "You won't object to complete disclosure of internal communications, loan officer performance metrics, and compensation structures that may have incentivized aggressive foreclosure tactics." The specific terminology suggested Kingston's investigation had uncovered evidence of internal motivations driving AFC's actions. Performance metrics that rewarded foreclosures over workout solutions. Compensation structures that made completing foreclosures more profitable than maintaining performing loans. Communications that revealed strategic thinking behind seemingly operational decisions. Thornton made his move to leave, recognizing that remaining in the room offered no advantage and significant risk of further damaging revelations. Margaret Whitmore followed suit, though she maintained her professional composure throughout her departure. As the power players evacuated the auction house, Maria remained seated, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her circumstances. An hour ago, she had entered this building resigned to losing everything. Now, she found herself at the center of a major investigation that could reshape agricultural lending practices throughout Arizona. Kingston approached her directly, her stern public persona softening into something approaching maternal warmth. "Ms. Santos, I know today has been overwhelming. My team will be in touch within 24 hours to discuss your options and begin the process of reviewing your loan terms. In the meantime, I want you to know that Verde Valley Ranch is safe from immediate foreclosure." The words released years of accumulated tension. Maria's shoulders, which had carried the weight of impossible responsibility since Miguel's death, finally lowered as tears tracked down her weathered cheeks. The public humiliation she had endured moments earlier transformed into public vindication as the remaining auction attendees witnessed her genuine relief. "Why?" Maria managed to ask through her emotion. "Why did you involve yourself in my situation?" Kingston's answer revealed the humanity beneath her banking executive exterior. "Because I grew up on a farm in Kansas, Mrs. Santos. My father lost everything in the 70s when banks stopped working with family farmers and started working against them. I've spent my career trying to ensure banking serves communities rather than destroying them. When my team discovered the patterns in AFC's agricultural portfolio, I knew intervention was necessary. The personal history provided context for Kingston's fierce advocacy. Her actions weren't merely professional ethics in practice. They represented redemption for a childhood loss and determination to prevent other families from suffering similar fates. As Maria prepared to leave the auction house, she reflected on the morning's extraordinary events. Her desperate gambit to save Verde Valley Ranch had unexpectedly triggered a much larger confrontation between ethical banking principles and predatory financial practices. While her immediate future remained uncertain, the farm she had feared losing was now protected, at least temporarily, by the most powerful advocate she could have imagined. The investigation Kingston had initiated would undoubtedly reveal more than Maria could have discovered on her own. Corporate malfeasance that had destroyed numerous farming families might finally face accountability. Perhaps other farmers caught in similar situations would find their circumstances reviewed and potentially reversed. Walking out of the Pemberton Bank building into the warm Arizona sunshine, Maria felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief dominated, but underneath flowed currents of anger at the manipulations that had nearly destroyed her family, gratitude for Kingston's unexpected intervention, and hope that Verde Valley Ranch might yet survive to continue Miguel's legacy of sustainable farming. The pickup truck that had carried her to what she thought was her farm's funeral now started on the first try, a small but encouraging sign. As she drove back toward Verde Valley, Maria began mentally cataloging the tasks awaiting her attention. Crop rotation needed planning. Equipment maintenance schedules required updating. Her children would need to be informed about the morning's developments without burdening them with the full weight of recent revelations. For the first time in 3 years, Maria Santos allowed herself to imagine a future for Verde Valley Ranch that extended beyond mere survival. Perhaps the farm could once again thrive as the anchor for sustainable agriculture Miguel had envisioned. Perhaps the broader investigation would create systemic changes that protected other family farms from predatory practices. These possibilities transformed her drive home from a funeral procession into something closer to a victory lap. The desert landscape, which often appeared barren to outsiders, revealed its hidden beauty to Maria's farmer's eye. Sparse rainfall created resilient vegetation. Hardy mesquite trees provided shade and habitat. The soil, though challenging, held nutrients and potential for those patient enough to work with its rhythms rather than against them. Miles passed beneath her truck's worn tires as Maria processed the morning's events. Patricia Kingston's dramatic entrance would become legend in Phoenix banking circles. The investigation she had launched would likely generate headlines for months to come. Lawsuits would follow. Corporate restructuring might result. Regulations could be strengthened to prevent similar abuses. But for Maria Santos, single mother and determined farmer, the most important outcome remained intimate and personal. Verde Valley Ranch had been granted a reprieve. The dreams she and Miguel had cultivated in the desert soil might yet bear fruit for their children and future generations of family farmers. As the familiar outlines of her property appeared on the horizon, Maria whispered a prayer of gratitude for unexpected allies, for justice's unpredictable timing, and for second chances that arrived in the most dramatic moments of despair. The red oak door of her farmhouse had never felt heavier than the moment Maria pressed her palm against its weathered surface later that afternoon. Her children's bicycles lay scattered across the front porch. Carlos's mountain bike with its flat rear tire he'd been meaning to fix, and Isabella's smaller purple one, adorned with handlebar streamers that caught the desert wind. These simple remnants of normal life seemed almost foreign after the morning's extraordinary events at the auction house. Inside, the familiar scent of tortillas and fresh cilantro drifted from the kitchen where her mother, Elena Santos, was preparing an early dinner. At 72, Elena moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades feeding a family while managing her own small grocery business. She turned at the sound of Maria's entrance, her weathered face immediately reading the complex emotions her daughter carried. "Mija," Elena said softly, setting down her wooden spatula, "what happened at the—" "Mama," Maria interrupted, her voice carrying a tremor between exhaustion and disbelief. I think we might actually keep the farm." The words hung in the air, too precious and fragile to be fully embraced yet. Elena crossed herself quickly, then pulled Maria into a tight embrace that smelled of cumin and decades of unconditional love. They stood in the modest kitchen, holding each other as grief, fear, and hope mingled in silent communion. "Tell me everything," Elena whispered when they finally separated. Over steaming cups of café de olla, Maria recounted the morning's events with halting detail. The planned humiliation, the mocking laughter of the corporate bidders. Patricia, Kingston's dramatic entrance, the investigation, the temporary reprieve. Elena listened intently, occasionally gasping or crossing herself at particularly dramatic moments. "Ay, Dios mío," Elena murmured when Maria described Kingston's specific accusations against Agricultural Finance Corporation. "This explains so much. Remember when our store's credit line was suddenly altered after Papa's stroke? We thought it was just bad timing." The parallel struck Maria powerfully. These patterns of financial manipulation had touched multiple generations of their family, targeting moments of vulnerability with precision. The small grocery store had survived Papa's medical crisis, but barely, and only through Elena's fierce determination and community support. "Where are Carlos and Isabella?" Maria asked, realizing their usual after-school chaos was notably absent. "Carlos is helping Juan patch the irrigation line that burst yesterday. Isabella is collecting eggs and doing her homework in the coop. She likes the quiet there." Elena paused meaningfully. "They've been worried, Mija. Children sense when parents are drowning, even when we don't speak the worry aloud." The observation carried Elena's particular brand of wisdom, gentle but uncompromising in its truth. Maria had tried to shield her children from the farm's financial crisis, maintaining routines and projecting optimism. But stress seeps through household walls like termite damage, invisible until structural weakness reveals itself. Before Maria could respond, the distinctive sound of her brother Juan's truck rumbled into the driveway. Moments later, the screen door slammed open with enough force to rattle its frame, heralding the entrance of Juan Santos and his 12-year-old nephew Carlos. "Tia Maria!" Carlos shouted, his clothes dusted with dried mud and sweat beading, his forehead from afternoon labor. "Uncle Juan says the irrigation system is running at 87% efficiency now. He engineered a valve bypass that—" "Easy, hee-ho," Juan interrupted with a laugh, ruffling his nephew's dark hair. At 38, Juan resembled a slightly softer version of Miguel, same strong jaw, same gentle eyes, but without the farmer's constant sun damage and physical wear. His accounting practice in Tucson had protected him from Arizona's harsher elements, though he'd spent countless weekends these past years helping maintain Verde Valley Ranch's operations. "Tell him about the pressure sensors," Carlos insisted, his excitement infectious. The boy had inherited Miguel's mechanical aptitude and love for understanding how systems worked. At 12, he could diagnose tractor problems better than many experienced farmers. "Later, Carlos, your mother has news about the auction." Juan's expression grew serious as he studied Maria's face. What happened? We heard rumors about Patricia Kingston stopping the sale. The rumors barely scratch the surface, Maria began, then launched into another recounting of the morning's events. Juan's accounting mind focused immediately on the financial implications, interrupting with questions about specific loan modifications, interest rate calculations, and fee structures that had buried them in debt. Variable rate triggers linked to market futures, not actual crop performance? Juan's voice rose with professional outrage. That's predatory lending 101. If they implemented similar structures across their agricultural portfolio, they've potentially violated multiple banking regulations. The validation from her brother, trained in financial law and ethics, strengthened Maria's growing understanding that her family's struggles hadn't been failures of farming skill or business acumen. They'd been victims of systematic exploitation, designed to separate farmers from their land. "Where's Isabella?" she asked, suddenly needing to gather her entire family close. "In the chicken coop with her homework," Carlos answered. "She's been spending lots of time there lately, says it helps her think." "Go get her," Maria requested. "We need to talk as a family." As Carlos trotted toward the chicken coop, Juan moved closer to Maria. "Before he returns with Isabella, tell me straight, what happens now? A reprieve isn't a solution. Kingston's investigation could take months. We'll need a real plan." The question cut to the heart of Maria's remaining anxiety. Kingston's intervention had saved Verde Valley Ranch from immediate seizure, but the underlying financial crisis remained. Bridge financing might provide breathing room, but without addressing the fundamental debt restructuring or finding sustainable income streams, they'd merely be delaying the inevitable. "I was thinking," Maria began slowly, testing the idea aloud, "what if we pivoted more aggressively toward agritourism? Miguel always resisted it, thought it diluted our farming mission, but maybe it's time to embrace a hybrid model." Juan nodded. Encouragingly, farm-to-table experiences, educational workshops, seasonal events, tourist revenue could offset crop uncertainty. "And there's the organic certification Miguel started but never completed," Elena added, surprising them both. With her engagement in the conversation, that premium market positioning could justify higher prices. Before they could develop the ideas further, Isabella burst through the back door, Carlos trailing behind. Their 8-year-old daughter possessed Miguel's serious nature and Maria's fierce determination. Her dark braids bounced as she ran, school backpack forgotten outside, as she sensed the family gathered for important discussion. "Mama," she said breathlessly, "is it true the farm isn't being taken away?" Maria knelt to eye level with her youngest child. Isabella's uniform jumper was stained with chicken coop dirt, her hands still slightly dirty from whatever task she'd been attempting with the birds. In her eyes, Maria saw the intelligence and worry that had grown since her father's death, a child forced to mature too quickly by circumstances beyond anyone's control. "It's true, mi amor," Maria confirmed, pulling Isabella close. "We get to stay." The family gathered in the living room, a modest space dominated by Miguel's handcrafted bookshelves filled with agricultural texts and family photographs. Maria shared the morning's events once more, this time shaping the narrative for children's ears while preserving the essential truth. Their home had been threatened, but a powerful ally had intervened to protect them. "Will the bad people come back?" Isabella asked when the story concluded. The question pierced through adult complexities to the core fear that had haunted their household for months. Maria exchanged glances with Juan and Elena before responding. "Sometimes, when people are very powerful and want something badly, they use unfair methods to try to get it," Maria explained carefully. "But there are also powerful people who believe in fairness and protecting families like ours. Ms. Kingston, is one of those people. Like a superhero banker, Carlos offered, drawing a laugh from the adults. Exactly like that, Maria agreed, grateful for her son's ability to frame even serious situations with childhood optimism. Elena stood and moved to the kitchen. While you all talk, I'll finish dinner. These revelations deserve celebratory tamales. As Elena's preparations filled the house with familiar cooking sounds, Maria outlined preliminary survival strategies for her family. Juan produced his tablet, creating digital charts and financial projections as they discussed potential revenue streams. The certified organic process takes 18 months minimum, Juan noted, stylus hovering over his screen. We'd need cash flow solutions for the transitional period. What about community shares? Maria suggested. Some farms in California have successfully partnered with urban consumers who buy seasonal shares up front. It provides immediate capital while guaranteeing distribution channels. CSA programs, Juan confirmed, typing rapidly. Community-supported. Agriculture. We'd need to develop marketing materials, establish delivery routes, and determine fair pricing structures. Carlos listened intently to the business discussion, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated unexpected comprehension of farming economics. Isabella, while quieter, absorbed everything with the serious concentration that reminded everyone painfully of Miguel's presence. As they talked, a knock at the front door interrupted their planning session. Maria opened it to find Patricia, Kingston, standing on her porch, accompanied by a younger woman carrying a briefcase. "Ms. Santos," Kingston began formally, then paused as she took in the family scene. "I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I wanted to personally deliver the next steps for our investigation." "Please come in," Maria invited automatically. Despite her surprise at the banking executive's unannounced visit, Kingston entered with the same commanding presence she'd displayed at the auction house, but here, in the humble farmhouse setting, her humanity showed more clearly. She accepted Elena's offer of coffee with genuine gratitude, complimenting the children on their well-mannered greetings. The younger woman was introduced as Michelle Chen, a banking regulations specialist who had been leading Kingston's investigation team. Together, they spread documents across the dining table, explaining their preliminary findings with a mixture of professional precision and personal concern. "We've uncovered evidence of a coordinated strategy affecting at least 17 farms in Maricopa County," Chen explained, highlighting specific loan documents. AFC's parent company, Meridian Financial Holdings, has been systematically targeting agricultural properties with development potential. "The methodology is sophisticated," Kingston added. "They identify farms with aging owners or recent family transitions, situations that make loans more vulnerable to manipulation. Then they deploy variable rate triggers, assessment challenges, and technical violations to accelerate foreclosure timelines." "My God," Juan muttered, scanning the documents with his accountant's eye. "The correlation is undeniable. Every accelerated foreclosure coincides with either a zoning change petition or water rights reassessment." "Precisely," Chen confirmed. "And in 94% of these cases, the properties were acquired by one of 3 development companies with documented financial ties to Meridian's leadership." The revelation transformed the family's perspective from personal misfortune to systematic targeting. Maria's foreclosure wasn't an isolated incident of bad luck. It represented a deliberate piece in a much larger scheme to transfer agricultural land to commercial development. "What happens now?" Maria asked, trying to maintain focus, despite the overwhelming implications. "Tomorrow morning, I'm personally restructuring your loan," Kingston stated firmly. "We'll establish terms based on the farm's actual historical performance and crop yield data. not artificial stress tests designed to trigger failure. She produced a folder containing preliminary calculations. Based on Verde Valley Ranch's documented organic production and local market presence, we project sustainable monthly payments at approximately 40% of your current obligations. This assumes minimal expansion over the 18-month organic certification period. The numbers brought tears to Maria's eyes. For 3 years, she'd been treading water, struggling to meet payments that consumed nearly 75% of the farm's gross income. The proposed restructuring would allow not just survival, but actual operational capacity. Additionally, Chen continued, Cornerstone is prepared to offer a matching grant program for farms transitioning to certified organic production. You'd receive development funds tied to sustainable agriculture milestones rather than acreage sold. This is too generous, Maria protested softly, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. It's strategic investment, Kingston corrected. Banking institutions should support local food systems, not dismantle them for development interests. Your farm represents exactly the kind of sustainable agriculture we need for Arizona's future. Elena emerged from the kitchen with a tray of steaming tamales, extending traditional hospitality despite the evening's unexpected nature. As they shared food around the family table, the conversation shifted from financial details to broader implications. Meridian won't surrender easily, Kingston acknowledged between bites. They have significant political connections and substantial legal resources. The investigation I've initiated will trigger pushback. You're putting yourself at risk, Maria realized aloud. Your bank, your reputation, all to protect farms you have no obligation to help. Kingston set down her fork, her expression thoughtful. When I started Cornerstone 25 years ago, I made a promise to myself and to this community. Banking should strengthen local economies, not extract their resources. Every farm we save keeps food dollars circulating locally. Every family that stays creates stability for the next generation. She gestured around the modest dining room, its walls decorated with children's artwork and family photographs. This is what real bank security looks like, not marble lobbies and corporate mergers, but families anchored to productive land. The philosophical foundation of Kingston's banking practice resonated deeply with Maria's own values. Miguel had often spoken similarly about farming's deeper purpose beyond profit, the responsibility to steward land, sustain community, and preserve knowledge for future generations. There's something else, Chen interjected, producing additional documents. Our investigation uncovered that Meridian has been manipulating water rights data in coordination with certain county officials. They've been artificially inflating usage assessments to pressure farms into selling rights independently of the land. The revelation explained the mysterious tripling of water fees that had accelerated Verde Valley Ranch's financial crisis. Juan immediately began calculating the excess payments, his anger growing as the numbers mounted. That's over $40,000 in unauthorized fees across 2 years, he concluded grimly, and that's just for this property. Multiply that across 17 farms, Kingston added, and you begin to understand the scope of this operation. We're not just looking at unethical banking practices. We're potentially examining systematic fraud with environmental and community impacts. The gravity of the situation settled over the family dinner table. Their personal struggle had revealed connections to a much larger pattern of institutional corruption that threatened the entire agricultural ecosystem of central Arizona. What can we do to help? Carlos asked unexpectedly, his 12-year-old, voice earnest with determination. Kingston smiled at the boy, who had his father's serious demeanor. The best thing your family can do is survive and thrive. successfully farm this land using sustainable practices, prove that family agriculture has a future in Arizona. After Kingston and Chen departed, promising to return with finalized loan documents the following day, the Santos family remained at the dinner table, processing the evening's revelations. Papa would be proud, Carlos said thoughtfully, helping clear dishes. He always said the land belonged to whoever respected it most. Maria paused in her cleanup, struck by her son's wisdom. The day's events had transformed from a story of near loss to one of moral victory. Kingston's intervention represented more than financial rescue. It symbolized the power of ethical action in the face of systemic corruption. That night, as Maria tucked Isabella into bed, her daughter asked, "Mama, will you teach me everything about farming so I can help save our land too?" The question, delivered with 8-year-old earnestness, carried profound implications. Isabella wasn't just asking about agricultural techniques. She was declaring her intention to become a steward of their family legacy. "Of course, mi amor," Maria promised, smoothing her daughter's braids. "Starting tomorrow, you'll learn why Miguel planted orange trees by the chicken coop, how to read soil health, and why certain vegetables grow better side by side." As Isabella drifted to sleep, Maria lingered in her daughter's room, reflecting on the day's transformation. The morning's despair had evolved into evening's cautious optimism. The farm they'd fought to save now represented something larger, a test case for whether family agriculture could resist corporate encroachment. In the adjoining room, Carlos sat at his desk, sketching irrigation system improvements with the same focused intensity Miguel had displayed when planning next season's crops. The boy had inherited his father's mechanical gifts along with his mother's determination to preserve their agricultural heritage. Elena bid goodnight with her customary blessing, adding extra prayers of gratitude for unexpected allies and divine intervention. Juan lingered to finalize preliminary business plans on his tablet before driving back to Tucson, promising to use weekend time developing the CSA program structure. As the farmhouse settled into night quiet, Maria stepped onto the back porch, breathing in the desert air that carried hints of irrigation water and distant mesquite. Stars blazed overhead with desert clarity, untouched by city light pollution. This sky had witnessed generations of Caldwell. No, she corrected herself, Santos' determination as families worked the land below. Patricia Kingston's words echoed in her mind. Banking should strengthen local economies, not extract their resources. The principle seemed revolutionary in its simplicity after years of predatory lending experiences. Tomorrow would bring the formal loan restructuring, the first concrete step towards securing Verde Valley Ranch's future. But tonight offered something even more valuable, hope restored, and a clear understanding that their struggles hadn't resulted from personal failing, but from systematic exploitation designed to benefit the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. The desert night carried sounds of life, adapting to harsh conditions. Coyotes calling in the distance, night insects humming their survival songs, irrigation pumps maintaining their rhythmic pulse. Each sound represented persistence despite challenge, exactly the quality that would be required in the months ahead. Maria's phone vibrated with a text message. Aunt Rosa, who ran a small organic farm in Sedona, had heard rumors of the morning's drama. Heard Kingston stopped an AFC assault. Proud of how you stood strong, Sabrina. The farming sisterhood has your back. The message reminded Maria that their struggle wasn't isolated. A network of small farmers throughout Arizona faced similar pressures, and victory for Verde Valley Ranch could strengthen resistance across the region. In the morning, after delivering the children to school and dropping Carlos at his summer construction job, Maria planned to meet Kingston at Cornerstone's downtown office. They would review the restructured loan terms, discuss the matching grant, application process and begin mapping strategies for the coming months. But tonight belonged to recalibration, absorbing the reality that their darkest moment had revealed unexpected allies and exposed threats that extended far beyond their family's circumstances. Patricia Kingston's intervention had not only saved Verde Valley Ranch, but potentially disrupted an entire system of exploitation that had claimed numerous other farms. As Maria prepared for bed, she paused at Miguel's photograph on her dresser. His steady gaze seemed to communicate understanding of the day's events, the vindication of his suspicions about corporate manipulation, the emergence of ethical banking, allies, and the renewed possibility of preserving their agricultural legacy. "We're going to make it, mi amor," she whispered to the photograph. "Not just survive, but thrive, like you always dreamed." The commitment carried weight beyond mere words. Tomorrow would begin the real work of rebuilding Verde Valley Ranch on a foundation of sustainable practices and community support. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Maria Santos fell asleep without the crushing weight of impending loss. The farm was safe, her children had hope, and powerful allies had emerged from unexpected quarters to challenge the forces that threatened their way of life. The morning sun painted the Phoenix skyline in shades of amber and gold as Maria navigated her pickup through downtown traffic toward Cornerstone First National Bank's headquarters. Unlike the sterile glass towers housing most financial institutions, Cornerstone occupied a beautifully restored 1920s building that maintained original Art Deco features while incorporating modern functionality. The lobby's copper ceiling and terrazzo floors spoke to craftsmanship and permanence, qualities increasingly rare in contemporary banking architecture. Patricia Kingston's office on the 10th floor offered panoramic views of the city spreading toward distant mountains. When Maria entered, she found Kingston already seated at her mahogany desk, reviewing documents with the same intense focus she'd displayed at the auction house. "Ms. Santos?" Kingston stood immediately, her professional demeanor softened by genuine warmth. "Thank you for coming. I want to discuss not just loan restructuring, but a comprehensive support program for family farms facing similar circumstances." Over the next 2 hours, Kingston outlined Cornerstone's revolutionary approach to agricultural lending. Traditional banks measured success through loan volume and quick turnover. Kingston proposed measuring impact through family farm preservation, sustainable practice adoption, and local food system strengthening. "We're creating what I call legacy lending," Kingston explained, producing charts that mapped long-term farm sustainability metrics against traditional banking indicators. "Instead of short-term profit extraction, we focus on multi-generational stewardship support." The restructured loan terms reflected this philosophy. Rather than demanding immediate payment reduction, Kingston proposed a graduated system tied to sustainable farming milestones. Implementing organic practices, diversifying crop systems, or establishing community partnerships would earn interest rate reductions and extended grace periods. This transformation requires a fundamental shift in how we evaluate agricultural value, Kingston continued. "Soil health improvements, water conservation measures, and community food security contributions should factor into creditworthiness alongside traditional metrics." Maria found herself energized by Kingston's vision. After years of fighting predatory practices that viewed farms as real estate commodities, encountering a banker who understood agriculture's deeper purpose felt revolutionary. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Michelle Chen entered, with urgent news that transformed the already momentous morning into something even more significant. "The investigative team found something crucial," Chen announced, spreading documents across Kingston's conference table. "Meridian Financial Holdings has been operating under a complex network of shell companies, many registered offshore. Their Agricultural acquisitions are just one component of a much larger water rights speculation scheme. The documents revealed a sophisticated operation. Meridian wasn't simply acquiring farms for development. They were positioning themselves to control Arizona's groundwater resources as climate change intensified water scarcity. The farmland purchases were strategic pieces in a larger puzzle of water dominance. "Look at this map," Chen continued, highlighting a digital display showing property acquisitions across 3 states. They've been systematically purchasing parcels that sit above major aquifers or control key water flow corridors. Combined with their political influence, they're essentially engineering a privatized water monopoly. The revelation elevated their struggle from local resistance to a potential statewide, even national battle for water rights justice. Arizona's future as an agricultural state depended on protecting these resources from monopolization. Kingston's response demonstrated why she commanded such respect in banking circles. Within minutes, she initiated conference calls with the Arizona Attorney General, the EPA's Western Division, and the Department of Agriculture's Water Rights Enforcement Unit. Each conversation delivered carefully curated evidence packages that Chen's team had prepared. "Mr. Brisebois," Kingston addressed the Deputy Attorney General directly, "the evidence suggests violations of the Desert Water Banking Statute, the Groundwater Management Act, and potentially federal interstate commerce regulations. Meridian's acquisitions create an effective monopoly over critical water infrastructure." The legal implications were staggering. If proven, Meridian's scheme could result in civil penalties exceeding $100 million, criminal charges against executives, and mandatory divestiture of acquired water rights. More importantly, it could establish legal precedent preventing similar speculation schemes throughout the American West. After the calls concluded, Kingston turned to Maria with renewed determination. "Your case has become the catalyst for a much larger reckoning. Verde Valley Ranch isn't just a family farm anymore. It's ground zero for the battle over Arizona's water future." The weight of this responsibility initially overwhelmed Maria. She'd entered this morning expecting to sign loan documents and secure her family's immediate survival. Instead, she found herself positioned at the center of an environmental and economic justice movement that could reshape agricultural policy across the Southwest. "I don't know if I'm equipped for this kind of fight," Maria admitted, her customary confidence shaken by the expanded scope of their conflict. Kingston moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. 3 years ago, everyone said I was foolish to start a regional bank focused on ethical lending during a period of financial consolidation. They predicted Cornerstone would fail within 18 months. She turned back to Maria with fierce determination. "I didn't build this institution to play it safe. I built it to prove that banking can be a force for justice. You've been fighting alone for your family's survival. Now you have allies with resources, expertise, and the moral conviction that your cause represents something essential about who we are as a society." The pep talk resonated deeply with Maria's core values. Miguel had often spoken about farming as more than occupation. It was participation in the eternal cycle of growth and renewal that sustained life itself. Protecting that capacity from commodification served interests far beyond individual farms. Chen presented the next phase of their strategy. "We're filing emergency injunctions today to halt all pending Meridian foreclosures statewide. Simultaneously, we're developing a rapid response fund to help affected farms implement immediate sustainability measures while legal challenges proceed." The fund, capitalized at $50 million by Cornerstone and several partner institutions, would offer low-interest bridge loans, technical assistance grants, and legal support for farms fighting predatory foreclosure. Rather than waiting for court victories, they'd proactively strengthen vulnerable properties against manipulation. Verde Valley Ranch can serve as a model, Kingston proposed. If we can demonstrate successful transformation from threatened foreclosure to thriving, sustainable operation within 12 months, it validates our entire approach. Over the next several hours, they developed a comprehensive implementation plan. Maria would work with a team of agricultural specialists to accelerate organic certification while implementing innovative farming techniques that reduced costs and increased yields. Simultaneously, Verde Valley Ranch would host educational workshops, demonstrating sustainable practices to neighboring farms. The community-supported agriculture program would launch within weeks, with cornerstone employees receiving priority shares and a portion of proceeds creating an emergency fund for other participating farms. They projected 100 initial subscribers, generating $180,000 in advance operating capital. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Kingston's office, they refined focus on immediate next steps. The loan restructuring would finalize the following week. An agricultural consultant would visit Verde Valley Ranch within 48 hours to assess infrastructure needs and prioritize improvements. Chen would coordinate legal protection against potential Meridian retaliation. One more thing, Kingston added as they prepared to conclude. I want you to testify before the State Water Commission next month. Your personal experience, combined with our investigation data, could influence crucial policy decisions about water rights privatization. The request amplified Maria's anxiety about her expanding public role. She'd always been more comfortable expressing opinions through action, growing food, nurturing soil, teaching children, than through words at government hearings. I'm not a public speaker, Maria protested. I wouldn't know what to say. Say exactly what you told those bidders at the auction, Kingston advised. Speak truth, defend your land, demand justice. That kind of authentic testimony carries more weight than practiced rhetoric. They parted with a firm handshake that conveyed mutual respect and shared commitment. As Maria drove back through Phoenix traffic, her mind raced with implications and opportunities. The morning's meetings had transformed Verde Valley Ranch from a struggling family farm into a symbol of resistance against water monopolization. Her phone buzzed with multiple messages. Aunt Rosa had organized a coalition of small organic farmers willing to collaborate on bulk purchasing and shared distribution networks. Father Michael from St. Joseph's Church offered the parish hall for CSA share pickup and community education events. Several local restaurant owners expressed interest in farm-to-table partnerships featuring Verde Valley Ranch produce. The momentum felt both exhilarating and overwhelming. 3 months ago, Maria had been treading water alone, desperately seeking any solution to mounting bills and threatening notices. Now, unexpectedly, she found herself surrounded by allies, united in common purpose. Approaching Verde Valley Ranch, Maria noticed immediate differences in its landscape. Juan's truck was parked near the equipment barn, where he'd begun organizing inventory for the sustainability audit. Elena worked in the expanded vegetable garden, showing Isabella proper companion planting techniques, while Carlos helped install drip irrigation upgrades. Her mother spotted Maria's arrival and hurried over, soil-stained hands gesturing excitedly. Mija, the most wonderful thing happened while you were gone. Remember the Rodriguez family? They lost their farm near Tempe last year. Maria nodded, recalling the heartbreaking story of experienced farmers forced to sell after sudden loan modifications made payments impossible. They called asking about renting some acreage, Elena continued. They want to start small again, growing traditional Mexican vegetables for farmers' markets. With what you learned today about sharing resources, I told them we'd work something out. The spontaneous decision reflected instinctive community solidarity that had sustained rural life for generations. Rather than maximizing profit through high-value crops alone, sharing land with displaced farmers could strengthen both families while preserving agricultural knowledge. Inside the farmhouse, excitement permeated every conversation. Juan had discovered state grant programs supporting sustainable farming infrastructure that perfectly aligned with Cornerstone's matching funds. Carlos had researched irrigation technology, advances that could reduce water usage by 40% while improving crop yields. Isabella proudly displayed seed packets she'd organized for next season's planning, each labeled with planting dates and companion crops. As they gathered for an early family dinner, Maria shared the day's revelations about Meridian's water speculation scheme. The information contextualized their personal struggle within a broader environmental justice movement that threatened Arizona's agricultural future. "So they weren't just after our farm," Carlos summarized with his characteristic analytical precision. "They were after control of the underground water that could support hundreds of farms like ours." The understanding transformed his perspective on their situation. At 12, he grasped that defending Verde Valley Ranch served interests beyond family financial security. It protected community access to essential resources that sustained life in the desert. That evening, as desert stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, Maria stood beside Miguel's memorial tree, a drought-resistant Aleppo pine they'd planted together the year before his death. Its branches had strengthened considerably, now providing shade for his favorite outdoor reading spot. "The fight's bigger than we imagined," she whispered to Miguel's memory. "Patricia Kingston sees what you always saw, that farms like ours protect more than crops. We're guardians of water, soil, community, standing against forces that view everything as commodity." The pine's branches rustled in the evening breeze, carrying scents of sage and desert rain. In this moment of quiet reflection, Maria realized that her journey from desperate auction bidder to water rights defender contained a broader narrative about the struggle to preserve human-scale agriculture in an era of corporate consolidation. Her phone rang with Patricia Kingston's personal number. The late-night call suggested urgency. "Maria," Kingston began without preamble, "I've just learned that Meridian's attorneys are filing for dismissal of our injunctions based on procedural grounds. They're using every legal maneuver to delay investigation and maintain acquisition momentum." The news challenged Maria's nascent optimism. Legal battles could stretch for years, while farms continued falling to foreclosure. Communities couldn't wait for justice's slow process. "What do we do?" Maria asked, grasping for direction. "We accelerate community organizing," Kingston declared. "Legal channels remain essential, but grassroots pressure creates political urgency. Tomorrow, I'm announcing Cornerstone's Family Farm Protection Initiative publicly. We need voices, farmers, consumers, environmental advocates, demanding change before the current legislative session ends." The strategy recognized that policy battles required both top-down legal action and bottom-up community mobilization. Banks could file injunctions and lawsuits, but only organized citizens could pressure legislators to strengthen agricultural protection laws. "I know you value privacy," Kingston continued, "but I'm asking you to become the public face of sustainable farming's resistance to corporate water grab. Your story, nearly losing everything, then discovering exploitation targeting multiple families, resonates with anyone who fears predatory financial institutions." The request pushed against Maria's natural inclination toward private perseverance. She'd always believed in leading through example rather than speeches, growing food rather than giving interviews. "I'll think about it," Maria temporized. "Fair enough," Kingston accepted. "But remember, silence protects the status quo. Change requires voices willing to break that silence regardless of personal comfort." After the call ended, Maria remained on the porch, contemplating the morning ahead. In less than 24 hours, her world had expanded from intimate family struggle to public advocacy for agricultural preservation and water rights justice. She recalled Miguel's funeral, where numerous farmers had shared stories of his quiet leadership, how he'd helped neighbors implement sustainable techniques, shared equipment during tough seasons, mentored young farmers exploring organic methods. His influence had spread through action, not words. But perhaps the current crisis demanded different tools. Corporate manipulation operated through legal obscurity and political influence. Countering such power might require public testimony that illuminated predatory practices for broader audiences. Her contemplation was interrupted by Carlos appearing at the screen door. "Mum, I finished that irrigation efficiency analysis. Want to see? If we implement the upgrades Uncle Juan suggested, we could save enough water to irrigate an additional 20 acres or share with the Rodriguez family's vegetable operation." His enthusiasm reflected engineering fascination combined with social purpose, exactly the perspective needed to address looming water challenges. Arizona's future required technical innovation serving community resilience rather than corporate profit. "Show me everything," Maria invited, grateful for her son's hopeful energy, "and explain how these systems could teach other farms to use less water while growing more food." Later, as the family prepared for bed, Maria gathered them in the living room. She explained Kingston's request for public advocacy and sought their perspective on accepting a more visible role in the growing movement. "Papa always said problems shared get smaller," Isabella offered solemnly. At 8, she possessed intuitive wisdom about community dynamics. "Maybe if you tell everyone about the mean companies, other families won't lose their farms." Carlos nodded supportively. "And if we show how we're fixing things, other kids my age might want to become farmers instead of thinking farms are old-fashioned." Elena smiled at her grandchildren's insights. "Your father fought quietly for what he believed, but times change, mija. Sometimes justice needs a megaphone." Juan, ever the pragmatist, outlined practical considerations. Public advocacy increases, both opportunity and risk. Television appearances, newspaper profiles, social media presence all create pressure points Meridian might exploit. But silence guarantees their narrative dominates. The family discussion continued past usual bedtimes, weighing personal privacy against collective responsibility. They examined potential impacts on the children's school lives, considered security, measures for handling possible harassment, and strategized about managing Maria's farming responsibilities alongside public appearances. Dawn approached with decisions crystallizing. Maria would accept Kingston's invitation to become a public advocate for sustainable farming and water rights protection. But she'd establish clear boundaries, speaking only about issues directly affecting agricultural survival, avoiding personality conflicts with corporate leaders, and ensuring family safety remained paramount. The choice represented evolution rather than revolution. Maria hadn't sought this role, but circumstances demanded adaptation, just as Verde Valley Ranch needed to embrace new farming techniques to survive changing conditions. Its guardian needed to develop new skills to protect it from unprecedented threats. As morning light crept across the desert landscape, Maria felt Miguel's presence more strongly than any time since his death. Not as absence, but as continuity. The values he'd lived, working with nature, supporting community, resisting exploitation, now demanded public expression in an era where private perseverance alone couldn't guarantee survival. She drafted her first public statement alongside breakfast preparation, combining practical farm experience with moral clarity. Rather than attacking individual companies, she'd focus on principles, family farms as essential infrastructure for food security, water rights as community resources rather than commodities, banking's responsibility to strengthen rather than extract from local economies. The words flowed naturally once she imagined speaking directly to fellow farmers facing similar pressures. No rhetoric or inflated language, just honest communication from one guardian of the land to others. By mid-morning, preparations accelerated. Cornerstone's public relations team arrived to discuss media training, while Kingston arranged initial interviews with sympathetic outlets focused on agricultural issues. The Rodriguez family visited to finalize land-sharing arrangements, bringing their own enthusiasm for cooperative farming models. Amid this activity, Maria maintained farming routines that anchored her sense of purpose. Morning irrigation checks, plant health assessments, soil pH testing, these tactile connections to agricultural fundamentals prevented the expanding advocacy role from overwhelming her primary identity as farmer and mother. The afternoon brought unexpected validation when Sheriff Martinez arrived with surprising news. After reviewing evidence Kingston's team had discovered, he'd launched a parallel investigation into potential criminal violations of state water law. Local law enforcement's engagement signaled growing recognition that Meridian's activities exceeded civil disputes into potentially fraudulent territory. The banking investigation uncovered falsified water usage reports, fabricated contamination claims, and evidence of officials accepting payments to expedite certain permits. Martinez explained gravely, "This extends beyond predatory lending into organized water rights fraud." His visit attracted attention from neighboring farmers who'd been monitoring Verde Valley Ranch's situation with combination of hope and skepticism. As Martinez departed, several remained to discuss forming a coalition to share information and resources for resisting similar pressure. Maria found herself naturally assuming leadership, explaining Kingston's findings, describing sustainable techniques they'd successfully implemented, offering her newly acquired knowledge about legal protections. The spontaneous gathering evolved into a planning session for regional cooperative farming networks that could strengthen collective bargaining power against corporate buyers. By evening, Verde Valley Ranch had transformed from isolated survivor to catalyst for community organization. Phone numbers were exchanged, resource-sharing apps established, meeting schedules coordinated. The crisis that had nearly crushed Maria's family was fostering connections that could sustain entire farming communities. That night, reviewing the day's whirlwind developments, Maria recognized a fundamental truth about defensive struggles transforming into positive movements. Fighting to preserve something requires eventually fighting for its flourishing. Resistance alone couldn't sustain hope. Vision for better futures motivated persistent action. She called Patricia Kingston with her final decision. "I'll do the public advocacy, not just because we need to stop Meridian, but because we need to show what's possible when communities stand together for a different kind of future." Kingston's response carried both satisfaction and strategic planning. Perfect timing. Tomorrow morning, we're filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of all 17 affected farms, plus any others who've experienced similar manipulation. Your testimony will humanize statistical evidence, but more importantly, it demonstrates that resistance works, that ordinary citizens can challenge institutional power and win. The conversation concluded with practical arrangements for the next day's press conference. Maria's first public appearance would transform Verde Valley Ranch's near loss into a rallying cry for agricultural preservation and water rights justice across Arizona. As she prepared for another short night's sleep before the dawn of a new challenge, Maria reflected on the rapid evolution of her circumstances. The humiliation endured at that auction house had catalyzed a series of connections and revelations. That elevated personal crisis into community transformation. Miguel's legacy, she realized, wasn't just Verde Valley Ranch's survival. It was the principle that land belongs to those who steward it respectfully, that water serves communities rather than profits, that families united in purpose could resist even the most powerful exploitation. The battles ahead promised difficulty. Meridian wouldn't surrender significant water assets without exhausting legal maneuvering. Media appearances would challenge her private nature. Public scrutiny might intensify pressure on her children and threaten carefully maintained routines. But the alternative, silent surrender to systems designed to separate families from land and communities from resources, had become unthinkable. Tomorrow would witness the first step in a longer journey toward agricultural justice, but tonight belonged to preparation and family solidarity that anchored all meaningful resistance. As desert stars blazed overhead in their timeless positions, Maria Santos finally found peaceful sleep, knowing that morning would bring new challenges, but also powerful allies committed to ensuring that banking served agricultural communities rather than the reverse. The conference room at Cornerstone First National Bank pulsed with anticipation as journalists arranged cameras and photographers positioned lights. Maria Santos sat between Patricia Kingston and Michelle Chen, her weathered hands folded on the polished walnut table, representing thousands of Arizona farmers threatened by corporate water speculation schemes. She dressed deliberately in her best Sunday outfit, a simple navy dress that Elena had ironed with careful attention to every crease. Unlike the business suits surrounding her, Maria's attire spoke to the dignified simplicity of rural life that deserved protection from financial predators. This morning, Kingston began to the assembled media, Cornerstone First National Bank announces the largest coordinated legal challenge to predatory agricultural lending in Arizona history. Our investigation has uncovered a systematic campaign by Meridian Financial Holdings and its subsidiaries to force family farms into foreclosure for water rights acquisition. The room crackled with professional energy as reporters recognized a major story developing. Kingston's reputation for scrupulous honesty lent immediate credibility to allegations that might have seemed fantastic from less respected sources. Chen presented evidence methodically: loan modification patterns targeting vulnerable farms, coordinated water rights manipulation, shell companies obscuring ownership trails. Each revelation built toward an undeniable conclusion. Meridian had engineered a scheme to privatize Arizona's groundwater through foreclosure. When Kingston introduced Maria, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Media professionals recognized authentic, human narrative emerging from statistical analysis. Cameras focused intently as she began speaking, her voice steady despite obvious nerves. 3 months ago, I stood in this city's auction house, watching strangers laugh at my $15,000 bid to save my family's farm, Maria began, her words carrying the weight of lived experience. I thought my failure came from my own inadequacy, that I couldn't continue what my husband built after his death. She paused, gathering strength from remembering Kingston's dramatic entrance. That day taught me that what I perceived as personal failure was actually systematic exploitation. Verde Valley Ranch wasn't failing because we lacked skill or determination. We were being deliberately pushed toward foreclosure to separate our land from its water. The first question came from a seasoned agricultural reporter who understood farming's complexities. Ms. Santos, how do you respond to banks claiming they're simply managing risk in volatile agricultural markets? Maria's response drew from both practical experience and moral clarity. Real risk management supports farmers through difficult seasons while protecting lending institutions. What Meridian practiced was risk creation, engineering conditions that guaranteed failure, then profiting from that failure through land acquisition. Her words resonated with reporters familiar with Arizona's farming struggles. Traditional media narratives often portrayed agricultural foreclosures as inevitable results of changing economics. Maria's testimony offered a more troubling explanation that promised rich, investigative stories. Throughout the press conference, she maintained focus on tangible impacts over abstract policy debates. She described neighbors who'd lost generational farms, children forced to relocate from rural schools, communities losing local food sources. Each example personalized Meridian's actions with concrete human consequences. The breakthrough moment came when a Phoenix television anchor asked about water privatization fears. Maria's response synthesized personal experience with broader environmental justice concerns that would resonate far beyond banking circles. Water belongs to no single person or corporation, she declared with conviction. In the desert, water sustains life itself. When companies manipulate families into giving up water rights, they're not just changing ownership, they're threatening Arizona's future survival as a farming state. The soundbite captured essential truth that would dominate coverage. Kingston's team had prepared for various questions, but Maria's authentic articulation exceeded their most optimistic projections. She spoke with the authority of someone who defended something fundamental against powerful opposition. As the press conference concluded, multiple outlets requested follow-up interviews. National networks recognized the story's potential implications for rural America's financial struggles. Agricultural publications sought deeper exploration of sustainable farming practices under corporate pressure. Outside the conference room, Kingston pulled Maria aside. "That was extraordinary. You transformed complex financial crimes into a moral imperative that anyone can understand. Preserving family farms isn't just nostalgia, it's protecting essential resources for future generations." The following week erupted with activity across multiple fronts. The class action lawsuit triggered immediate responses from Meridian's legal army, who deployed procedural challenges designed to delay hearings indefinitely. But Kingston had anticipated such tactics, filing motions in federal court that bypassed state-level obstruction. Meanwhile, Maria's testimony resonated far beyond legal circles. Local restaurants began displaying "Supporting Verde Valley Ranch" signs, pledging to source produce exclusively from farms fighting corporate water consolidation. Church groups organized solidarity events, not just raising funds but educating communities about groundwater threats. Carlos Santos became an unexpected advocate himself when his middle school invited him to explain his family's situation during Environmental Week. At 12, he possessed his father's technical knowledge and his mother's moral clarity, describing irrigation innovations with the same passion he expressed about justice. "My family almost lost our farm to companies who want to own the water. Under our feet," he told his classmates confidently, "but we're fighting back with better farming methods and community support. Every farm that survives keeps food growing locally and water available for everyone." His presentation inspired students to organize their own support event, a farmers' market on school grounds featuring Verde Valley Ranch produce and neighboring sustainable farms. Parents who attended recognized how corporate water speculation threatened not just rural families, but future food security for entire communities. Isabella, despite her youth, contributed uniquely by creating artwork depicting the invisible water beneath farmland as life-giving veins, connecting all living things. Her drawings appeared on CSA share boxes, transforming mundane vegetable deliveries into educational moments about aquifer protection and sustainable agriculture. The Rodriguez family's establishment on shared Verde Valley Ranch acreage proved remarkably successful. Their traditional Mexican vegetables attracted new market segments, while their experienced labor helped Maria accelerate organic certification processes. The cooperative model demonstrated how family farms could thrive through resource sharing rather than competing for survival. Meanwhile, Cornerstone's Rapid Response Fund began transforming vulnerable farms throughout Arizona. Rather than waiting for legal victories, Kingston provided immediate assistance: infrastructure upgrades, reducing water usage, organic certification support, legal protection against meridian harassment. Each successful intervention strengthened the broader movement's momentum. 6 weeks after the press conference, Arizona's Water Commission scheduled hearings on proposed regulations limiting corporate water rights ownership. Meridian deployed teams of lobbyists to oppose any restrictions, while Kingston coordinated testimony from affected farmers to demonstrate necessity for stronger protections. Maria found herself increasingly comfortable in advocacy roles, but she never lost connection to daily farming rhythms. Each morning began with soil checks and irrigation maintenance before traveling to hearings or interviews. This grounding in practical agriculture lent authenticity to policy arguments that purely academic environmentalists couldn't match. The breakthrough arrived unexpectedly through international attention. A documentary crew from Germany, investigating global water privatization trends, featured Verde Valley Ranch as a success story of community resistance. Their film premiered at the Berlin Environmental Film Festival, drawing global scrutiny to Arizona's water battles. European media coverage particularly embarrassed Meridian's parent company, which maintained public commitments to sustainable development while pursuing resource privatization in the American Southwest. The contradiction forced explanations to international investors concerned about ethical business practices. Domestically, momentum built through careful organizing. Kingston's network of regional banks formed an alliance promoting agricultural stewardship lending, financial products, supporting multi-generational family farming rather than quick profit extraction. Traditional banks, observing public admiration for Cornerstone's principles, began reconsidering their own predatory practices. The political breakthrough came when Arizona's junior senator, facing tough re-election prospects, embraced agricultural protection as a campaign platform. Senator Barbara Chen's legislation proposed federal oversight of any financial institution acquiring more than 10% of a state's water-producing properties within 5 years. Family farms represent America's original entrepreneurship. Chen declared at a rally on Verde Valley Ranch, "When banks manipulate families into surrender instead of supporting their success, we're losing more than property. We're losing our national character." Her words echoed Martin Luther King Jr.'s understanding that economic justice forms the foundation for all other freedoms. Without secure access to productive land and water, rural families couldn't participate meaningfully in democratic society. The rally drew over 500 supporters, including members of the Apache Nation whose ancestral water rights had been similarly threatened by corporate maneuvering. Maria found herself forming unexpected alliances across cultural boundaries, united by shared dependence on Arizona's groundwater. "Our reservations face the same corporate schemes," explained tribal elder Joseph Runningbear. "Different tactics, same goal. Separate indigenous peoples from water that sustained us for thousands of years." These connections expanded the movement's scope beyond agricultural concerns to encompass deeper questions about resource sovereignty and environmental justice. Corporate water speculation threatened anyone without sufficient capital to compete. In privatized markets, small farmers, native communities, working-class urban residents. As summer intensified, Verde Valley Ranch demonstrated tangible success through crisis transformation. Organic certification proceeded ahead of schedule, with premium buyers securing advance contracts for certified produce. The CSA program expanded to 250 subscribers, creating stable income while building consumer awareness about sustainable farming. Educational initiatives flourished as families from Phoenix drove out weekends to participate in farm workshops. Children learned about soil ecosystems while adults discovered connections between water conservation and food quality. These events generated additional revenue while cultivating new generations of agricultural advocates. Isabella's artistic talents evolved into a community project when she collaborated with local art students to create a mural depicting Arizona's food and water systems. The installation at Phoenix's public market featured flowing aquifers, diverse crops, and family farmers as essential components of sustainable communities. Tourists stopping for photographs often inquired about the narrative, spreading awareness. Organically, behind the public success, legal battles intensified. Meridian's attorneys exploited every procedural delay while simultaneously attempting to accelerate remaining foreclosures before potential regulatory changes. Each week brought new challenges requiring immediate response from Kingston's expanding legal team. The crisis peaked when Meridian's private security firm conducted property assessments on several vulnerable farms, photographing irrigation systems and interviewing neighbors about water usage patterns. These activities, while technically legal, constituted obvious intimidation designed to discourage resistance. Maria's response revealed how dramatically her leadership capabilities had evolved. Rather than reacting defensively, she orchestrated a coordinated response utilizing newly formed alliances. Farmers organized rotating watches documenting all corporate surveillance activities. Legal observers accompanied every Meridian representative, ensuring no laws were violated through intimidation. They want us afraid, isolated, convinced resistance is futile. Maria addressed a community meeting that drew farmers from 3 counties. But isolation created our vulnerability. Unity builds our strength. Every farm that refuses intimidation inspires others to stand firm. Her words particularly moved elderly farmers who'd survived previous agricultural crises through community solidarity. Many recalled cooperative movements from the 1970s that had protected family farms through collective bargaining and shared resources. The generational perspective provided vital context for contemporary struggles. Predatory lending wasn't new. Its methods simply adapted to each era's regulatory environment. Understanding this pattern helped counter Meridian's narrative portraying foreclosures as natural market adjustments rather than engineered outcomes. 3 months after starting their public campaign, tangible victories emerged. Federal banking regulators launched formal investigations into Meridian's agricultural lending division. The investigation forced disclosure of internal documents, revealing explicit strategies for targeting vulnerable farms near aquifer resources. One particularly damaging memo outlined psychological pressure points for encouraging foreclosure acceptance, timing modifications during family stress events, denying workout options that regulations required, using assessment fees to compound financial strain. These documents validated every suspicion that had driven Kingston's initial intervention. Media coverage shifted from sympathetic human interest stories to aggressive investigative reporting. National news anchors discussed the Santos revelations when describing how one family's resistance had exposed nationwide patterns of agricultural exploitation. Major newspapers launched editorial campaigns demanding federal legislation to prevent financial institutions from acquiring controlling interests in water rights. The public pressure culminated in Meridian's board announcing an independent review of their lending practices while pledging cooperation with all investigations. Corporate spin couldn't obscure the panicked retreat behind seemingly voluntary reforms. Private communications intercepted by investigators revealed frantic attempts to settle pending cases before damaging trials could proceed. Maria maintained perspective throughout expanding media attention. Success meant more than punishing corporate wrongdoing. It required establishing sustainable systems, preventing similar exploitation in future. Her advocacy focused increasingly on positive alternatives rather than negative condemnation. Protective regulations matter, but community resilience provides lasting defense, she emphasized in one televised interview. Strong local food networks, cooperative farming arrangements, ethical lending institutions, these foundations enable families to resist external pressures while meeting essential community needs. The philosophy attracted other community organizers facing different corporate threats. Speaking invitations arrived from groups fighting water privatization in California, land speculation in Texas, mineral rights manipulation in Colorado. Maria accepted selectively, ensuring Verde Valley Ranch's continuing operations remained her priority. October brought the first major legal victory when Judge Harold Morrison ruled that Meridian had violated state banking regulations through systematic loan modification discrimination against agricultural borrowers. The preliminary injunction froze all pending foreclosures and required review of modifications implemented during the previous 24 months. The evidence demonstrates a clear pattern of targeting farms with significant water resources through financial instruments designed to guarantee failure rather than manage risk, Morrison wrote in his opinion. Such practices violate both the letter and spirit of agricultural protection statutes. The ruling triggered seismic shifts throughout Arizona's financial sector. Banks scrambled to review their own agricultural loan portfolios, concerned that similar patterns might invite regulatory scrutiny or class action litigation. Some preemptively offered modified terms to distressed farmers, prioritizing relationship preservation over maximized extraction. For Maria, vindication carried complex emotions, celebration of justice mixed with grief for farms already lost. Determination for continued struggles balanced against exhaustion from months of intense advocacy. The victory proved partial. Meridian would appeal. Challenging could stretch years. Other communities faced similar threats. She returned to Verde Valley Ranch that evening, seeking solitude among rows of heirloom tomatoes nearly ready for harvest. The desert sunset painted mountains in shades of amber and rose, while irrigation water murmured its eternal rhythm across carefully planned channels. These basics hadn't changed despite surrounding upheaval. Miguel's memorial pine had grown significantly since spring, its branches providing unexpected shade where none existed before. Maria sat beneath its protection, feeling her husband's presence tangibly for the first time since beginning this larger journey of justice. "Your dream isn't lost," she whispered to his memory. "It expanded beyond what either of us imagined possible. Verde Valley Ranch anchors a movement now, protecting what you taught me, that land and water and community matter more than profit." The reflection brought clarity about paths forward. Their immediate crisis had stabilized through Kingston's intervention and community support. Legal challenges would continue engaging corporate power. But sustainable transformation required building alternatives rather than merely resisting exploitation. That night, Maria drafted plans for Verde Valley Ranch Academy, a formal educational program combining traditional farming wisdom with modern sustainable techniques. The initiative would honor Miguel's legacy while addressing documented shortages of young farmers equipped to maintain America's food production capacity. The Academy's vision encompassed more than technical training. It proposed cultivating holistic understanding of agriculture as environmental stewardship, community connection, and cultural preservation. Students would learn soil science alongside indigenous planting practices, water conservation technology, together with traditional irrigation knowledge. Funding partnerships crystallized rapidly as various interests recognized mutual benefits. Agricultural universities needed practical field experience sites. Environmental organizations wanted demonstration spaces for sustainable practices. Philanthropic foundations sought effective programs addressing rural economic development through traditional livelihoods. Most importantly, neighboring farmers expressed interest in hosting apprentices, sharing equipment, and collaborating on marketing initiatives. The cooperative networks formed through crisis resistance evolved into permanent infrastructure supporting regional food systems. By late autumn, Verde Valley Ranch had transformed from nearly lost family operation to successful case study in agricultural resilience. Production continued increasing under organic certification processes, while educational programs drew consistent participation. Financial stability emerged through diversified revenue streams, CSA shares, farmers market sales, workshop fees, consulting arrangements. Carlos had begun documenting the farm's technological innovations through a YouTube channel that attracted surprising viewership from aspiring young farmers worldwide. Isabella's art projects continued inspiring junior, environmental advocates at schools throughout Phoenix. Their children's confidence in agricultural futures reflected parents' successful defense of farming as viable livelihood rather than quaint anachronism. The broader movement Kingston and Maria launched also demonstrated remarkable progress. The Rapid Response Fund had assisted 47 farms across Arizona, with 36 successfully avoiding foreclosure through negotiated settlements or technological upgrades, reducing operational costs. Each success story strengthened the network's capacity to help additional families. International attention accelerated when various European development banks contacted Cornerstone, seeking partnerships in promoting ethical agricultural lending globally. Kingston's model demonstrated that banking focused on family farm preservation generated sustainable returns while building community wealth rather than extracting it. As December approached, bringing Verde Valley Ranch's first year under potential, foreclosure to conclusion, Maria prepared to testify before Congress regarding proposed federal legislation protecting agricultural water rights from speculative acquisition. Senator Chen had sponsored the Agricultural Resource Protection Act with bipartisan support following Arizona's successful resistance against Meridian's schemes. The invitation represented culmination of a journey beginning with public humiliation. At that Phoenix auction house, standing before national legislators, Maria Santos would speak with authority earned through defending principles fundamental to sustainable society. That water belongs to those who steward it responsibly. That families deserve opportunity to maintain agricultural traditions. That banking should strengthen rather than destroy local economies. The night before departing for Washington, Verde Valley Ranch hosted a community gathering celebrating their survival and ongoing transformation. Over 200 people crowded into the equipment barn, its interior decorated with harvest abundance, strings of dried chilies, braided garlic, preserved herbs hanging overhead. Children performed songs about agricultural joy, while adults shared food prepared from the land they'd fought to preserve. Patricia Kingston delivered remarks acknowledging how one family's crisis had revealed institutional failures requiring correction. Maria Santos didn't ask to become the voice for thousands of threatened farmers. But when crisis confronted her with impossible choices, she chose to stand. In standing, she discovered others willing to stand alongside. Today's celebration honors not just Verde Valley Ranch's survival, but proof that community strength still trumps corporate power when organized effectively. Robert Wellington, The former AFC representative, whose presence at the auction had triggered Maria's public humiliation, attended the gathering unexpectedly. Having provided extensive cooperation with investigations after Meridian terminated his employment to scapegoat individual culpability, he approached Maria hesitantly. "I participated in systems I didn't fully understand until your resistance. Forced deeper examination," he acknowledged with evident remorse. "The lending modifications, acceleration triggers, assessment manipulations, I implemented procedures designed by others without questioning ultimate purpose or impact on families like yours." Maria accepted his acknowledgement with grace, reflecting, "Miguel's teaching about redemption's possibility. Understanding our roles in harmful systems allows choosing different paths forward. Your testimony strengthened investigations exposing these practices." As the gathering continued late into the desert night, Maria surveyed the assembled supporters, representing diverse elements unified through shared values. Farmers and bankers, environmentalists and business leaders, young students and elderly, traditionalists, all finding common purpose in preserving agricultural heritage against corporate resource monopolization. The stars blazed overhead with legendary Arizona clarity, their light traveling eons to illuminate this moment of community triumph. Maria thought of ancestors who'd similarly defended land against powerful interests across generations, understanding that such struggles defined each age's character as clearly as its achievements. Tomorrow would bring congressional testimony demanding federal action to protect America's agricultural foundation. But tonight belonged to celebrating local victory that proved national solutions possible. When communities organized around principles rather than mere profits, they could challenge even the most formidable corporate powers. As families departed into the darkness, children sleeping against parents' shoulders while adults walked with purposeful stride, Maria Santos stood with her own children on Verde Valley Ranch's porch. The farm that had almost slipped away now anchored expanding networks dedicated to agricultural justice. "We saved this place," Carlos observed with 12-year-old certainty. "But we did more than that. We changed how banks work, how farms survive, how people protect water." Isabella leaned against her mother, contemplating significance beyond her years. "Papa must be happy. We didn't just keep his farm. We made it mean something bigger." Their words captured essential truth about transformation achieved through crisis resistance. Verde Valley Ranch remained fundamentally the same. Fertile soil, reliable water, careful cultivation of crops feeding local communities. Yet everything had changed through understanding its place within larger systems of power, resource control, and justice. Maria gazed across familiar fields toward distant mountains silhouetted against starlit sky. The aquifer flowing beneath supported not just their crops, but community dreams spanning generations. Protecting that gift required eternal vigilance against those viewing water as commodity rather than commons. The battle with Meridian would continue through legal appeals and political maneuvers. Other communities faced similar threats requiring sustained resistance. Agricultural education, sustainable practices, cooperative economics, all needed ongoing development to ensure family farming's vitality. But standing on her porch, surrounded by children representing agriculture's future, Maria Santos felt profound peace about paths forward. They'd proved that defending land from corporate predation was possible when allies emerged from unexpected quarters and communities united around essential values. Tomorrow brought congressional testimony that might influence national policy, protecting American agriculture from financial manipulation. Tonight offered something equally precious, certainty that one family's stand against injustice had sparked broader awakening to economic systems requiring fundamental reform. The desert wind carried cool December scents, minerals and sage. and distant rain. Maria breathed deeply, filling her lungs with air, connecting all things breathing across the vast Arizona landscape. In defending Verde Valley Ranch, they'd defended more than property. They'd preserved space where future generations could maintain intimate relationship with earth, water, and each other. As she guided her children inside toward well-earned rest, Maria understood that their greatest victory transcended any specific achievement. They demonstrated that ordinary families facing impossible odds could prevail through courage, community, and commitment to principles larger than individual survival. The legend of Verde Valley Ranch's resurrection would inspire the farmers fighting corporate water speculation across America's changing West. But for Maria Santos, the most enduring legacy lived in her children's confidence that agriculture remained noble calling, worthy of their generation's talents and dedication. Tomorrow would begin writing new chapters in their continuing story of resistance and renewal. Tonight concluded the first, with Verde Valley Ranch still growing, still feeding, still connecting human purpose to Earth's eternal cycles under Arizona's boundless sky. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.